So I've built some cutting boards before, but it's wedding season. I have a few to give out as gifts and some friends that want them. So I built 4 cutting boards. I got 1, 2, 3. I built 4. One I just gave away already as a gift. I'll show you how I did it.
I love weddings.
Best part is
Free.
Getting nuts, doing crazy.
I looked around and found some wood species that I wanted to use. I was shooting for about 36 inches long. That way I could cut them both in half for 18-inch boards. Here are the species that I found. I have some Padauk, which I really like for the red contrast, maple, black walnut. I got some peely here. Next I have some really figured cherry, which made it a pain to get the boards all straight because of all the figuring. It wanted to stay curled, but I squeezed it together eventually. And here's what I ended up with. I really like using Wenge, but I didn't have any this time and didn't want to make this trip to the hardwood store just for Wenge, and this ended up being a nice combo anyway, so good to go. So I cut these all down to, like I said, 36, maybe more like 38 inches to leave a little extra space. Then I ripped them all down to about 1.5 inches because that's going to be the thickness once I flip these all on their side and glue them up face to face.
Guys, I ain't farting on no snare drum.
Working in the shop, dust collection is really important. It needs to stay out of the air and out of my lungs. And I love watching the dust going around in a circle before it goes down into this bucket for easy disposal. What's up, Sandboy? Like the Padauk on the floor. After ripping everything to 1.5 inches and laying on its side from left to right, I've got cherry, walnut, sapele, maple, Padauk, more maple. Here I am trying to figure out a nice combo to make it look pretty. It's easier for me to tell what I don't like than what I do, but I needed to spice it up a little bit, so I took some of the maple on one of the boards and I ripped it in half to make thinner strips, make it look a little bit more interesting. That way all the pieces of the wood weren't the same size. We needed some variance in here and make it look good. To do this, I found the center and then I ripped them using this feather board, which made the cut a little bit more accurate. Then I planed the face to make them nice and smooth and the exact same size. I did just do the Shelix cutter upgrade for this planer and the sound was reduced drastically. It's so much better. And so far the cut quality has been great as well. With those maple pieces ripped down to make them thin, I put them in between the thicker pieces of the darker wood and gave it that nice contrast. Before coming up with my final decision on the species layout, I sprayed some water on it to see what it'd look like when it's all finished with oil. This piece of maple had a groove on the face, so it needed some sanding and cleanup so it would make a proper joint when glued. I did decide to also rip this piece of maple in half to make all the maple pieces the same. These lines going across the board are just for reference when I'm doing the glue up, so I make sure everything lines up okay. A glue up on a cutting board isn't nearly as stressful as a big table, but this is twice the size of the normal cutting board that I do. I like to use cauls, but there wasn't enough space for the ones that I normally use underneath the clamps. Later, I'll add some 2-inch PVC underneath to give it more space. Unfortunately, glue scraping is all the rage on Instagram, but it's important to have a flat surface for your planer to reference against. So this has never happened to me before, but this black stain is from the combination of the glue and the steel on the clamps mixing together. It definitely stained the wood. After a bit of planing and sanding, it was gone. After getting this double board planed down, I cross-cut the end and then cross-cut the middle to make it 2 individual boards. Gluing up the second set of boards, I went back to my PVC method, where I'll lay the pieces of wood on the PVC. It'll be able to roll back and forth, have a little bit of separation from the clamp so that it doesn't cause that stain. And it also gives me something to clamp a coal to, which I'll show you in a moment. At this point, I really started struggling with the cherry. It has a lot of figuring in it, and I couldn't get a nice glue joint. I decided to cut all these pieces in half and just glue up 2 separate boards. It is really important to have nice flat surfaces to glue each piece together to make a nice glue joint. I did spend a decent amount of time sanding these to make them nice and flat. I ended up wishing I didn't do this, but I added the long pieces on each side of the cutting board to combat snipe from the planer. Just gluing these on and then ripping them off later should prevent snipe, but it ended up giving me some struggles and it wasn't worth it, I don't think. After planing these 2 boards, I needed to rip off the scrap wood that was glued to the outside. So trimming up the ends of these 2 boards, I actually cut my fingers off. I'm just kidding, Mom. My fingers are out of the way. It just looks kind of close in this shot.
Hey, Beth! What does burning smell like?
Now that I had these boards cut down to their final size, I like to put a nice chamfer on the bottom and top. And it's easier to sand than a round over. I like to put a nice heavy chamfer on the bottom to act as a handle. You maybe saw earlier when I was cross-cutting there was a bit of burning on the edges, so there was a lot of sanding involved in here. That really didn't take that long, but I ended up sanding these up to about 400, I think, and then I water popped after 220, 320, and 400 to raise the grain and then sand it back down. The last grit at 400 is pretty light for a cutting board. I use this jig I made all the time for the feet on cutting boards. It's just 1 inch in on each side, so I can just put the jig on the corner, drill the hole, and that's going to mark where the hole's going to be. Once the foot location is marked with the jig, I use a Forstner bit to just slightly recess the foot into the board. I recently purchased this laser and I'm excited to learn a lot more about these things.
Laser.
Pew, pew, pew.
It is super cool to be able to engrave things for gifts and make them more personalized. So this board has got a couple little spots where the glue line isn't quite as good as I wanted it to be. So I'm going to try to fix it. In the past, I've re-ripped and re-glued a couple boards, but I'm going to try not to on this one since it's a pretty small flaw. Try some wood glue. Some sawdust. It works, but now I got a red line between the maple and the walnut. I added a little more maple sawdust and wood glue and got to sanding and it fixed it right up. Like common with cutting boards, these boards will get a couple coats of mineral oil and then they will get a couple coats of mineral oil and beeswax buffed on. This is the first board that got finished and didn't make the intro cut. I wanted to get it finished in time for a wedding. I got it engraved and then gave it as a gift. So I start to put the cutting board feet on and I get interrupted. I think one of the hardest things for anyone that works at home is dealing with the kids that you have at your home.
What is she doing?
At least she is self-sufficient and hasn't broken any bones yet, but we'll see how long that lasts. After getting the first board finished and delivered, it was back to sanding the other 3 and getting them ready for oil. I will sand each board through the grits and label them as I go in case I get interrupted. That way I'll know where I'm at and won't have to start over. Here is the final 3 boards getting their first coat of oil. It's always kind of exciting. With this board upside down, you could see how I recessed the feet locations with the Forstner bit from earlier. You can also see the size of the chamfer I used, which will make a nice handle for the board once it is up a little bit with these feet. Do I look like Santa Claus? You want me to wear this for Christmas next year? I really like giving away cutting boards as gifts. It is more efficient to make more than one at a time. Whether you're making one cutting board or more, the most important thing is making sure your glue lines are nice and square for an even glue up. Thank you very much for watching.
Peace.